Thank you, Madam Speaker. Today, the House of Commons is debating Bill C-24. Two key components of this legislation are that it will increase the maximum number of weeks available to workers through EI with a maximum of up to a maximum of 50 weeks for claims that are established between September 27th, 2020 and September 25th, 2021. This is up from 26 weeks, which was established in legislation passed by the House earlier in the fall. This legislation is essentially an extension of pandemic emergency support benefits for Canadians because there are no jobs available to them. And this legislation fixes the Liberal caused loophole in the Canada Recovery Sickness Benefit for international leisure travelers. In the previous legislation this past fall, Canadians who could claim this benefit for their quarantine weeks when they returned from vacation, which obviously doesn't seem very ethical. And the official opposition brought this issue to attention back in December and January and called for an immediate change. And so here we are, the third month of 2021, and we are finally debating the needed changes to the September 2020 legislation. Conservatives support getting help to Canadians in need whose jobs have been eliminated as a result of government mandated restrictions and closures in response to the pandemic. But we are disappointed that once again, the Liberal response to the pandemic in this bill and in the minister's speech resoundingly failed to put forward a worker led, jobs first economic recovery plan for a post pandemic Canada. And it really would have been timely to do so today, given this week marks the 1 year anniversary since the World Health Organization declared a worldwide pandemic and lockdowns began in Canada, and life changed dramatically for all of us. And since that time, 12 very long months ago, the statistics of unemployment have been staggering. Since the end of CERB in September and the implementation of the new EI and CRB benefits, over 3 million Canadians have accessed the EI supports, with over 2.3 million Canadians currently receiving EI benefits as of mid-February, and over 1 million Canadians that are on the CRB since the end of September. So that's over 3 million Canadians that remain out of work. And it is very important to recognize that there is a sunset clause in these direct payments to Canadians, and that's September 25th, 2021, which is about 7 months from now. But my question is, what comes after that? Is the Liberal government suggesting that Canadians will no longer require government supports by the end of September? Will there be a transition period to help Canadians get back to work, or is the government planning to cut off Canadians and their families come September without providing a pathway or support to help them re-enter the workforce? And has the government examined what the impact to wages and the job market will be when 3 million Canadians attempt to re-enter the labour market? There's a lot of questions that have not been answered in the minister's speech or in this legislation. And the end of September for these programs also coincides with the Liberal promise to vaccinate everyone who wants one by the end of September. But here's the problem. Even if we do achieve that vaccination goal by the end of September, we know that jobs won't miraculously return overnight. The Canadian Federation for Independent Business has said between 71,000 and 220,000 small businesses will close permanently, which will eliminate between 1 million and 3 million jobs from the Canadian job market. 58,000 small businesses officially closed in 2020, and in the end, whenever that will be, CFIB suspects that 1 out of 6 Canadian businesses, that's all businesses, small, medium, and large, will close, with an estimated 1 in 5 to close in Alberta. And so for Canadians that aren't sure really what that means, go walk down the street, look at 6 businesses, now eliminate one of them, and then just keep doing that as you walk down the street. That's truly devastating for the economy and for Canada. And in Canada, the data has been clear that the uneven impacts of the pandemic, there are very uneven impacts of the pandemic. Men are rejoining the workforce in greater numbers as women are leaving the labor market altogether. In fact, labor force participation for women has been set back 30 years. So it hasn't been this bad for women, Madam Speaker, since before I was born. And regarding newcomers, people may remember in the fall when the Liberal government triumphantly said it would bring in over 401,000 new permanent residents in Canada this year, which is more immigrants into Canada than any single year in our history. And they argued it would help our economic recovery, which it might. However, numbers just released saw that Canada lost 4% of its permanent residents last year. They just packed up and left Canada, possibly for good, because there was no opportunities here for them. And Canadians should know that on a regular year, our permanent residents grow by 3%. So really, this is a 7% setback. So immigrants are giving up on the Canadian dream. Women and young people have fewer and fewer opportunities. And it would seem that Canada is no longer a place for small business entrepreneurship. So it really doesn't take an economist to realize that it will likely take years, perhaps a decade or more, before new businesses are created to replace the ones that we've lost. And after a year, the government's only plan thus far is to further extend emergency supports. And so my issue with Bill C-24 is that it is not a jobs recovery plan. It is yet another Band-Aid. And the Prime Minister recently promised in the House of Commons that the government would, quote, bring back opportunities. But he has failed to tell Canadians exactly how he will do that, and in particular, how he will do that given the top developed nations in the world are racing to be some of the first to recover and to relaunch their economies. Fierce world economic competition is imminent. The US has pledged to fully vaccinate its population by the end of May, and the United Kingdom has said it will be fully reopened by June 21st because of their successful vaccine rollout strategies. They have made that commitment to their people. Meanwhile, in Canada, our vaccine rollout has been hovering around, 50th in the world, and as a result, we will be slower to recover, and we are in danger of being locked out and left behind of the international COVID-19 economic recovery and the jobs to be found therein. And more than that, there is the very odd fact that Canada has spent more per capita than any other G7 country, and yet has achieved the worst unemployment outcomes, as well as the worst vaccine rollout, as I've said, and also suffers from the lowest business confidence right now. So we're spending more, getting less. That really seems to be the Canadian Liberal way these days. And it does not bode well for the future, nor does it provide Canadians with confidence that this Prime Minister and his Liberal government have the competency to really turn the ship around. And so to conclude, I would like to touch on something beyond the job losses and the economic devastation, because the stakes really are very high that we get this right. So following a year of isolation due to lockdowns and restrictions, we know that the mental health of Canadians has been deeply impacted. People are deeply suffering. I speak to my constituents on a regular basis, and I can tell you people are really beginning to hurt it. It's palpable in my community, as I'm sure it is for all members of parliaments in their communities. Being kept inside, away from the people and activities we love, is really difficult for any amount of time, let alone 12 months. And what I find most frustrating is the Liberal government has not offered a solution or strategy to Canadians of how we get out of this. We're all praying for the vaccines to be delivered as soon as possible, but the Prime Minister said that the bulk of them may not get here until the end of September. He continues to make this promise, but is 7 long months away. And more than that, the Liberal government has not, this is the really shocking part to me, they have not even committed to reopening our economy, even if we do achieve 70% vaccination rates in Canada, which seems to be understood of what we need for herd immunity. And so to be clear, they have yet to promise that if we get people vaccinated by September, as they've promised on several occasions, that things will go back to normal. In fact, they've made every effort to avoid making that commitment. Meanwhile, other countries are delivering plans and promises and deadlines to their people. So Canadians have been left to guess when there will be a full economic reopening and a full dismantling of these restrictions. And that is something that people really do need to understand. No promise or commitment has been made. And as of right now, there is no end in sight for Canadians, and the Liberal government has failed to make this commitment. And I'm not sure why, given that they have yet to give these thresholds or indicators or measures as to when we can return to normal and get our lives back. Again, like I said, other countries are providing this certainty to their people. Or why they have failed to ensure widespread use and implementation of all tools available, like rapid tests, therapeutics, and of course vaccines. We've heard about these things for a year, and yet they have not been widespread. They're not in widespread use. And I know that the Liberal government is happy to blame the provinces, but the fact remains the federal Liberal government is supposed to be Canada's leaders in this crisis. So I don't accept that excuse. In my view, they should be moving heaven and earth to ensure the tools like that and like this are commonplace by now. They should be by now. And instead, we're being told to sit tight for a minimum of another 7 months. What I do know is Canadians need hope. That is something I hear every single day. They need to know when we will get out of this hell. And Madam Speaker, I do not choose that word lightly. That is what this is for people. Hope is something that will help people, and I'm almost done, will give them the strength to push through it for another 7 months, and really, God help us if we're in this for longer. We need hope, a plan, indicators, communication. There has been nothing, and I cannot put in stronger terms, people are suffering immeasurably. years from now, we will be looking at back on this data and seeing the economic devastation and mental health devastation it has caused. And I'm not really the only one saying this, it's social sciences experts across the country. And to conclude, parents have been telling me about their children that
is up, but the honourable member will be able to add during questions and comments. Questions and comments, the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. In so many ways, I would like to express how I disagree with my colleague in many of the things that she says. Does the Conservative Party support this legislation? And if they do support the legislation, will they recognize the urgency and start allowing government bills to pass?
The honourable member for Kildonan St. Paul.
Madam Speaker, I will note that the member did not dispute any of my claims, or that the claim that his Liberal government has not provided an end date in sight or any hope for Canadians or any commitment whatsoever. And I'll just refer him to the parents that tell me their children, their little children, are depressed, wives whose husbands have been laid off and they've told me they've seen their self-confidence plummet to dangerous levels, the elderly who have been emotional with me on the phone saying they don't want to spend their last few months or years on this earth alone in a room. It's the family businesses that have closed, their entire life work gone, and there's nothing they can do about it. So I did not hear anything from the member about those comments.
Questions and comments?
Spot. I wondered if the member has given some thought to the idea of a low-income CERB repayment amnesty and what the position of her party is in that regard.
The honourable member for Kildonan St. Paul.
I thank my colleague from Winnipeg for his questions. It certainly is nice to see Winnipeggers up today. And, I understand where he's coming from. What I really do feel is that this loss of hope, this despair is really that people don't have a choice. They have no power. There is nothing they can do when their businesses are closing. There's nothing they can do when their children they have no other options today, and we're really all powerless to the whims and decisions of our governments, which is of course led by the federal Liberal government and the Prime Minister. And really, I believe when people feel this powerless for this long, they lose hope, they lose strength to keep fighting, and frankly, they lose the will to live. And I've heard that firsthand, and I'm sure the member has heard similar from his constituents.
Questions and comments?
I wonder if you could just speak to how we got in this situation. Since we don't have any vaccines, we have no end in sight. What are we going to do?
So I just want to remind the member she's to address all questions and comments through the chair. A brief answer from the member for Kildonan St. Paul.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I thank my honourable colleague for her question. When I was the critic for immigration, I saw the vast mistreatment and the lack of dignity for new immigrants and newcomers. And I just want to conclude by saying the Prime Minister and the Liberals have provided, again, no strategy and no plan of how to reopen our economy, how to return to our free lives, other than vaccinations, maybe by September, and then maybe that's when we'll reopen. But it's been a year, and I firmly believe Canadians deserve more than a maybe 7 months from now. And as a Canadian and as a parliamentarian representing nearly 100,000 people, I urge the Liberal government to bring forward a plan to reopen the economy, to bring back jobs and bring back life and living. It is time for a plan, and it is time for hope. Thank you, Madam Speaker.